Say 2.7 years, half your building could be empty, or half of it could renew, but you are really kind of flirting with a razor's edge here.
It's really hard to own office buildings in these type of markets.
Fairly confident that you would have a very tough time chopping this up into residential.
I'm not a hard no at this point. I'm still a no, but I'm willing to listen to the story a little bit more now. Hi, welcome to this week's episode of Real Estate Anonymous. Excited to talk about Executive Tower this week, which is a office building in Metairie, Louisiana. Metairie holds a very, very important place in my heart. I lived in Metairie and my sister was born there. So this really feels like a going back home episode. And I'd say that we all love New Orleans. It's a fun place to visit. But as Bob Dylan would say in Tangled Up in Blue, you got to be sure you don't get tangled up in blue in New Orleans. And then Little Feat, also a great New Orleans band. You got to make sure that if you lose it all down at Spanish Moon, the whiskey and pad cocaine, prison gets you just the same. Hope y'all enjoy. Let's have some fun.
Your team is the most valuable part of your real estate business, and hiring the right people is crucial. But finding the best candidates on LinkedIn is tough, and as investors, we don't have time to headhunt. That's where Bullpen comes in. Bullpen is a staffing and recruiting firm dedicated to the commercial real estate industry. They support your talent needs from freelancer placements to full-time recruiting and executive search. Bullpen understands our unique business needs and shares best practices from around the industry. If you're looking to grow your team beyond what a job board can offer, I highly recommend Bullpen. Visit bullpenre.com to get started. That's bullpenre.com.
What's up, everybody? Welcome in Real Estate Anonymous podcast. Brett Moss, Eric Weatherholtz, and I'm Elliot White here joining you. We are going down to the Bayou. Does that sound right, gents? We're going to be in just outside of
New Orleans.
In Metairie. New Orleans. Yeah. I'm pretty excited about this one. It's a great little slice of the country. There's all kinds of challenges down there, but I don't know if any of you gents have ever spent any time there, but I kind of have this feeling Eric, without knowing, has got a great New Orleans story, because he just seems like a guy who would have a great New Orleans story.
A guy that lives in the seedy underbelly of America.
But I could be mistaken. Maybe you don't.
Right.
Yeah. That was kind of my feeling. I'll tell you, I was in New Orleans for work 4 or 5 years ago, and I was with a couple friends, and one of them, he said, I'm going to meet up with my cousin. They're in from out of town. They drove into New Orleans. They knew we were going to be here. So we're going to do family stuff. We're going to walk around, and we're going to, walk up and down Bourbon Street, and we're going to go shopping. And I thought, well, that sounds like just the worst I've ever heard. I don't want to do any of that. And so I rented a Harley.
Of course you did.
Early in the morning. I rented a Harley out of it was Eagle Rider in downtown New Orleans, and I was gone for the full day. I didn't know where I was going. I just left town and headed west, and I rode all along, kind of through the bayou where all these refineries are, and just these massive. I mean, the size of an oil refinery is hard to understand until you've seen it in person, and there's just rows of them out there. I found all these little communities that they were kind of homes that were on different waterways, and people would get to and from each other's houses on the water with kind of souped up pontoon boats or souped up dinghies. I popped in and out of a couple of bars and, crawfish shacks and stuff like that. It was super cool. I rode all the way around the lake up to Slidell. And then I had the misfortune of coming back down across the lake, this huge bridge in the middle of the night, because I was gone for 14 hours on this bike. But riding across the lake on that bridge back into New Orleans, it's a phenomenal memory. I absolutely love that city.
Well, I would imagine that you rode west from New Orleans, and it sounds like you found the Venice of Louisiana.
I did. I found the Venice of Louisiana. It was awesome.
Venice, Italy of Louisiana, different type of culture. What's funny is this podcast episode will feel like me going home again. Since I lived in Metairie, Louisiana for 12 months, and my sister Katie was born there. I don't remember any of it. It was from 6 months to 18 months, but this does feel like I'm going home for what it's worth.
Eric, you've been quiet. You got a good New Orleans story for me?
I'm trying to edit them in my mind as to what would be appropriate for family consumption. I guess in order.
This is going to be good.
I remember a late night with a guy who many years ago had met down on Bourbon Street, had met what he thought was a beautiful young woman that turned out not to be a woman. It had that early morning excitement, and I think the beautiful thing about New Orleans, it almost feels like it's not America. It feels like you're going to another country, and it's got its own rules and like, you see somebody get a parking ticket in New Orleans and they just grab the ticket, and if they see the meter person, they'll just start screaming at them, or start a fight with them. Or I remember walking Bourbon Street or down there at one point, and the a pleasant looking woman pushing a stroller mid-morning, and stopped, pushed the stroller ahead a few feet from her, and proceeded to vomit on the sidewalk and then keep going. Those are some of the little vignettes that pop through my mind when I think of New Orleans.
That's the epitome of a puke and rally right there. But I never really thought about it in that context. But I think that is the way I'm going to think of puke and rallies from now on.
Yeah, don't get any on the kid's head. Keep moving. Yeah.
When I was in New Orleans, I remember thinking that this weird thing happens where money doesn't really feel like money anymore. It's just tickets for fun. And so you think, well, I'd like to have more fun, please. And so you're like, you're just giving money to people. You're like, here's some more tickets. I'd like to have more of the fun. And Bourbon Street obviously has a reputation, and it can be totally wild and crazy. But there are some really cool parts of New Orleans, these little hole-in-the-wall jazz bars that you can duck into. And you can just sort of lose hours in there with some total characters, listen to some great music, eating unbelievable food. The only real estate advice that I have for folks is that if you are thinking about buying a deal in Louisiana, you need to use Louisiana Council. Louisiana has a different legal system than the rest of the country. They use,
back to my point.
Yeah, they use French civil law, which is, I think it's derived from like the Napoleonic Code or whatever. But their process is different than the other 49 states. It still kind of behaves, but there's nuance there that you really need to pay attention to. So if you find a deal in Louisiana, make sure that you find good local.
Well, I would say, Elliot, that's interesting. I did not know that. And I think that probably explains a lot. I would assume Napoleonic law does not reconcile with U.S. federal law, since it seems like most politicians from Louisiana end up with some sort of federal corruption charges when it's all said and done. So that whole puzzle piece just fit together a little bit better for me.
I'm changing minds here. I'm happy to help. Yeah, I'm not going to say that everyone in New Orleans and Louisiana is corrupt, but I will say that you do see certain things happening there that perhaps you aren't going to see elsewhere.
Well, yeah. So back to Eric's point about there's just different rules down there. I remember being down there for a wedding. It was the fanciest wedding I've ever been to by like tenfold. Unbelievable. Went on until 4 a.m. I made it till 2. When we're walking out, and there's 2 off-duty police officers who are drinking beers in uniform with weapons on them. And I'm like, I mean, they're pretty open-minded. That seems a little strange. A little strange, but like, who am I to judge? I live in a glass house. But like a couple nights before, with the bride, who's again from New Orleans, we're coming back from somewhere, and everybody had a good time. I'll just leave it at that. It's 3 a.m. We get to a red light, and she just goes right through the red light. And I'm like, oh, whoa. I won't say her name, but like, did you see the red light? Like, I'm okay with that, but let's be a little safer. She turned around and goes, we don't stop at red lights here. And I was like, well, I'm sitting at the back. When in Rome, just keep going. Yeah. These red lights, Breton, under Napoleonic law are optional.
Florida man.
Yeah, you're from Florida.
Oh man,
you don't know anything. I know. Okay.
I got a pal that
All
goes
right.
to
That's so
I don't
good.
think this is unusual, goes to Jazz Fest every year, and it's probably
Yeah.
he goes for both weekends, gets the premium pass. I think altogether it's probably a $25,000 experience to do that. And there's a ton of people that do that and invest that kind of dough into that community just through that one event. But I'm very high on my list to do.
It really is a great place. It's got a ton of problems.
Yep.
There's no question. But it's a wonderful part of it.
First time I saw Widespread Panic, to go back to the Athens student housing episode, Jazz Fest, May 3rd, 2001. Not that I remember anything.
Did you know who they were before you saw them, or did they come on stage?
No. So we went down there to see them, and it was like the first time I'd seen it. They played in the Municipal Coliseum on the 4th, and it was the first time I remember being at a live show being like, holy cow, this is a completely different thing. But I really didn't know much at this point. Had the time of my life. It was awesome. Love Widespread. But it was like the thing that set the hook for me on the live music deal. And so my wife and parents are super pumped about that, catching the bug 24 years ago or whatever that is now.
Interestingly enough, as much as we all love New Orleans,
It's not
the
in New
deal we're
Orleans.
going to talk about today, I think might be a piece of shit. But it'll be fun to talk about because we're basically going to talk about any weird office building built in the 80s, 70s or 80s. And so this one's in Metairie, which is just outside of New Orleans, suburb of New Orleans. Folks in Metairie, I think, believe that they're very, very different part of town, but it's all quite close.
Right across Lake Pontchartrain, right?
No, this would be.
I make a lot of stuff up, so I'm glad you're getting me on track.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no. Across Pontchartrain is huge. Across Pontchartrain, you go to
Slidell. I was right church, wrong pew there. But Metaire's home.
I mean,
Forget that. Metairie is home.
Yeah, Metairie. Right, Metairie's like 8 minutes from New Orleans, and Slidell's like 40. But yeah, sure.
I was young.
You were.
I was
close
young.
enough.
I needed the money. What can I say?
Yeah. So we're in Metairie, and I think this place is just called Executive
Tower. Very, very good. High marketing budget and for this operation.
Yeah. So it's full of executives. Obviously, they wouldn't have named it this. And what we've got here is
It looks like from the aerial, all executives have been consolidated.
Right, sounds like U.S. business at this point.
It's a whole lot of parking lots.
So,
right. We're working from home today, but thanks for the 30,000 square foot lease.
So, it's one of two, at least in the aerial anyway. It's one of two kind of tall buildings in Metairie that are office buildings. 188. That will give kind of a quick overview of this thing. 188,000 square feet. They're pitching the problems as opportunities, which God love them. They're talking about how you have the ability to mark to market the expiring leases.
I've heard that story before.
Yep. Apparently, you can also lease up the vacant suites, which that seems like low-hanging fruit. And the WALT, common office term, the weighted average lease term is 2.7 years. So in, let's say 2.7 years, half your building could be empty, or half of it could renew. But you are really kind of flirting with a razor's edge here. There's parking around it. There's a bunch of sort of low-rise industrial kind of looking or small two-story office buildings. It's definitely on an office and retail corridor, but there's some single-family homes nearby. I don't know. I think that. Well, let me ask the most important question. If this was for sale for $1, would either of you buy it?
I'll go first now.
The only way you can buy office, especially this kind of office in the world today, is based on leases. And so I think there's there are really good opportunities where you see these goofy, crappy, outdated office buildings, but they might have Nestle on a 15-year lease for 80% of the building, or they might have a, a couple of high credit tenants on surprisingly lengthy leases. And there's opportunities now where you can almost go with a uh, zero residual value type exercise, because the asset class is so beaten up, and people will are running from it, that there are actual contractual lease obligations that you can, with big companies, creditworthy companies. And to me, that's a really exciting opportunity when you can find those types of things. And the beauty of those is they can be anywhere. You almost don't care about the real estate. You're valuing leases. I put out X money, I'm going to get Y money back over the next 10 years or whatever it is. Um, Highly discount what the building's worth at the end of the day, as if it never gets leased again. With a 2.7 years, this is not that.
Right.
Um,
No, this is not that.
it would take a lot for me to get out of bed to go after this thing. But let's talk about what would do it.
Well, so I think that one of the things, Eric, that you mentioned, which I agree with, is the implied value of the office building here is zero, and I think that's true. The likelihood of renewing whatever resident or tenants are renewing here in the next 27 or 2.7 years or whatever it was is low, I would say, or at anything close.
And in some of these buildings, it's not zero; it's less than zero, because you've got to maintain these things. You got to people in Louisiana like air conditioning. I mean, there's a lot of expense just to keep it afloat.
Well, yeah, and so on that topic, I'd say, so yes, to maintain the building, very expensive, and then to go back to the concept of taking a office building from some level of occupancy to zero. There was a great example in Charlotte in the last, I think, 12 months, where Duke Energy was a single tenant on a 600,000 square foot newer vintage deal in downtown Charlotte. They terminated their lease, or they didn't renew their extension option. And so I think that was being marketed for sale at 18 million bucks or 20 million bucks, let's say. But then when you run the math to provide the tenant improvements to release the property, and then the leasing commissions to the brokerage side, the tenant rep side, as well as the landlord rep side, that capital investment was like $12 million. So that building goes being worth from 20 million to like 8, and like once you just lease it back up. And then so the other part of the equation, if people are buying office buildings as covered land plays, the implied value is actually negative, because you have to get the building off the site.
Right. Yeah, it's the land value minus the demo value.
But fortunately,
Right.
here you've got a multifamily development site right next door that you can build a structured park wrap deal on, which is pretty easy to do in today's environment. So you got that going for you, which is nice.
Yeah, so the part of the pitch here is they've got the office building and the parking lot, and they're saying it's in an opportunity zone, and that it could be zoned for multiple uses, and that you could theoretically develop apartments and a parking deck, which I mean, I suppose is true, but boy, I think that, all right, well, we've established that nobody wants to buy this building. The challenge with this building, specifically this, not the location, but just the way the building is built, is apparently the deals that work the best for the office to residential conversion. It's maybe 10 or 15% of all of the office buildings in the country. I was reading about this over the weekend. And really what determines their success in the office to residential conversion, and I don't know that there's demand for this here, but this is going to be a common question, so we'll talk about it. What determines success is if it's less than 30 feet from the elevator shaft. If the walls are less than 30 feet from the elevator. That seems to be sort of that sweet spot where you can have units that are not overly narrow and deep and dark and weird because of the floor plates. looking at this, it looks like a big cube. And I can't say for certain, but I'm fairly confident that you would have a very tough time chopping this up into residential. And I think it'd be more expensive than just demoing.
All right. So I did, scrolling around the property website here, I did stumble upon the location. And what is a wildly new concept in the commercial real estate business, which isn't really that new, but people are remembering again, locations actually matter. You can't buy a deal on the surface of the moon. It's not going to give you the same yield as being in, you pick the cool place and wherever you want to be. But one of the things in the real estate business that I say, and we predominantly work in the residential rental side, is we're going to do a lot of cool demographic research. The developer is going to do a lot of cool demographic research, but nowhere close to what the grocers or retailers are going to do, especially grocery stores. And so everybody's heard about the Whole Foods effect. You can't quantify it, but it's certainly there. Trader Joe's I'd put in the same category. Total Wine, well, I guess booze in New Orleans isn't that big a deal since you can buy that everywhere. But I'd say with just the Whole Foods and the Trader Joe's being adjacent to this, or on the same city block, I'm not a hard no at this point. I'm still a no, but like I'm willing to listen to the story a little bit more now. So I'm sharing my screen here. So I mean, the building is here at Esplanade and Causeway, and there's a Whole Foods at the next block. I don't know what direction we're in here, to the south. So if you go to the location tab, Elliot, my dad gave me 2 pieces of advice in high school. He said, learn as much Spanish as you possibly can and learn as much about computers when I was a 15-year-old. Guess what I didn't do either of? Learn to speak Spanish or anything about computers. And guess what? He was right.
I see what you're talking about. So just north of Interstate.
Correct. So the demos here have to be unbelievable.
Right. So, okay. So maybe that's a fair point. Maybe that's the saving grace. You've got decent single family home neighborhoods. We could check single family home prices, but I'm not convinced you can convert it to anything else. So is the exercise here, because someone's going to have to solve this problem. Eric, is the exercise here you just have to buy it for basically nothing and have enough capital set aside that you think you can get there? Or do you really believe that, look, even if I buy it for $0, the cost of the TI is going to be greater than what I.
Yeah, that's the trick. I think here you've got Whole Foods, you got Trader Joe's, you've got a mall with Apple in it that seems vibrant. Let's not forget Bobby Hebert's Cajun Cannon down the street.
Oh yeah, that's an old trust. That's an institution. I remember that from when we lived there.
But the problem with these, you've got this cash furnace of a building that impossible to dig your way out of oftentimes, because these rents, especially in these secondary markets, are below what the improvement cost, and those things just keep going. And anytime in these areas that if you own an office building and you start to get some traction and you start to get rents going up, anytime you start to see a little sunshine, a big hammer hits you in the forehead of someone else building the new building, and you get kicked back all the way back down the hill.
Yeah.
So if you push that rock all the way up, it's really, really hard to develop. It's really hard to own office buildings in these type of markets.
Right, and there's no shortage of land here. It's not like building. If you're successful, it's not like finding a site to build a new office building is going to be challenging for the other guy.
Well, but let's go back to this offering. You get a multifamily development site that's adjacent to it, so you're even going to get more land.
Are those? So I'm seeing some.
Yeah. So
pricing pulled up. So you've got homes that are.
Look at this.
600.
Yeah. So the property is
million, 800.
The property is like kind of right here, it's like kind of right here. And the Whole Foods and Trader Joe's are right here. And there's some lakeside shopping center here. And I'm trying to look up tents. But I mean, like, look at this house for like $1.3 million. That's a pretty nice house. I mean, I might move to Metairie actually. Now to come to think of it, I'm going to go home maybe next week. That's a nice house.
Eric, do these prices tell you?
Yeah.
Do these tell you anything? Because I have to imagine this is much higher than the average price in
Yeah, no,
New Orleans suburbs, right? I would bet you homes are closer to 300 or 400. These appear to be 600, 700, 800, a couple over a million, one at 2 million.
if you can go anywhere in
Yeah.
America and find Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, and Apple within a block, you want to own property there. This is no exception.
Yes,
The
yes,
problem is,
yes.
the problem is
Okay.
you've got this boat anchor chained to your leg of an office building that you've got to make the bet that
Mm-hmm.
I can renew these leases and get this thing leased. Do you want to be in that? Do you want to be in that speculative business in a dated product? That's the problem. The land is the location great, land great. What are you going to do with this office building?
If I believe you, which I do, that you want to own real estate in this part of town, this office building, I think it only works if you've got to have some understanding of what the best building in the market is, which probably isn't the building you're buying. You got to know what those rents are. And then you have to probably forecast what a new Class A building could command for rents. And you've got to make sure that your as improved rent is what, 60% of that? I mean, you have got to make sure that you are not trying to compete at all with that upper end. Because like you said, if you're even getting close, someone else is going to build a new building and knock you way back down the hill. Is there some discount to Class A where you think if my pro forma rent ends me up at 60 cents on the Class A dollar, I'm okay there?
Yeah, it has to be that these kind of buildings, um, you know, it requires that local expertise of somebody knows that, Exxon's in the market for 100,000 square feet.
Oh, God. You remember that deal we did in Venice where you were talking about someone's got an in with like the local tech company that they
Right.
know they're looking for space? You think it's that same kind of thing here? Someone knows that ConocoPhillips or Exxon is looking for office space and they've got that in their pocket. And it's the local warlord who buys this
I
thing and
think that's
leases
what
it
it
out.
has to be. You can't to speculate here feels like Russian roulette. And this is like anything, you've got to have the that local market expertise of knowing who's shopping this market, who's floating around. Can you get one of these big people, or you just simply have enough conviction that given the space sizes and configuration and general trajectory of the market that you know that you can keep this thing leased. There's a big sucking sound around these kinds of buildings generally, but that doesn't mean all of them. So there can be specific
Yeah.
instances where there's some little magic that can happen, and you can, because of the dropping tide, one might be able to find a deal and find something at a really attractive price. You've simply got to have information that we don't have about who's gonna occupy the daggone thing and what it's going to cost to get them in
And
there.
I think that that's a good point, Eric, 'cause I think it is a lot of inside baseball in New Orleans. At least that's what my parents did mention for the 12 months or illustrious tenure there. And I would think that, I mean, let's all be honest. I mean, that's really the way American business kind of works. It's like we're not always operating with perfect information as much as certain regulatory bodies would want you to think. But I would think here in Louisiana, under Napoleonic law, the inside baseball gets a little bit easier with like a duffel bag of cash, I would think, which
Yeah.
then like I'm having a recall of a movie called Blue Chips, which was Nick Nolte,
Yep.
Shaq, and Penny, and being in Orlando.
What a
That was
movie.
right,
Yeah.
that was Shaq's after his rookie year, and then we drafted Penny. That's a whole nother episode, but the coolest time to be a middle schooler of all time, especially if you lived in Orlando. But there's a scene in that movie with the other basketball player where Nick Nolte's recruiting him. He's from someplace in Louisiana, and his name was Ricky Rowe. That was his movie name. And Nolte's trying to close him on the recruiting front. And he's like, Ricky, anything I can do for you or your family? He's like, yeah, coach, there is something you can do. you can come back and bring me one of those duffel bag full of $10,000 in cash. And Nick Nolte gets so angry, he storms out. I think 10 minutes later, he comes back with the bag of cash, which is kind of how I'm thinking about Napoleonic law working. So that recruiting style was under Napoleonic law too.
I got approached. We may have talked about this, but I got approached for a bag of cash on a deal we were trying to do down in how specific? South. All right, I'll be specific. It was in Fall River, Massachusetts, and Fall River is a toilet town. It just is. It's a tough part of town. Nobody really wants to be there. And it was so bad that at the time, the mayor-elect was 22 years old. This is how fucked up your town is. You elect a child to be mayor. So I got this 22-year-old, and there's this affordable housing deal. It's called a 13A property. It's full of seniors, and it's reaching the end.
Well, he's going open kimono at this point.
Yeah, this was years and years ago. And it's a 13A, it's a senior high rise, and these are people who have been living in this building for like 40 years. They were working in the mills. They are blue collar seniors who spent their life in Fall River. The property is about to exit its affordable restrictions, and they are at risk. And we are looking for a way to preserve this asset. And I talked to the housing authority, just calling everybody, call the housing authority. Hey, is there any chance you have any Section 8 budget authority, which is just like, do you have Section 8 dollars? I knew that they were going to say no because everybody says no because nobody has any money. And they fucking said to me, you know what we do? We tore down a deal called Watuppa Heights 8-9 years ago, and HUD is still pissed at us for that. We have to replace 250 or 300 units of government housing. We could project-based. We could give you subsidy for this entire property. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. We're going to preserve these homes. The deal's going to be worth a ton. This is great. Go in and meet with the housing authority. Fine. I go in and meet with the mayor. This guy, Jaziel Correa, he's in jail now for racketeering charges. I go and meet with this child, and he's like, we're not having any more affordable housing in my town. I'm not going to approve this. And I said, well, what are you talking about? It's already affordable housing, and you need to, it was like trying to explain gravity to a chicken. And this guy could not understand that there was already affordable housing and that these were seniors who were his voters. I'm like, dude, you can protect them from getting displaced. Just approve the transfer of the funds. You have to do it anyway. HUD's asking you to do it. No. There's some shady dude named Dave who's in the meeting with us and approaches me a day or two later and says, I need $50,000 in cash and we'll get behind the vote that the housing authority is going to. I was like, what are you talking about? So I went to my old boss at the time. I was like, here's the deal. Do you want to put cash in a bag and pay off this child mayor? Or what? And we walked from the deal, and I was so pissed. And I knew a kid who knew him, and I told him, I'm like, your fucking friend is a piece of shit. And sure enough, we don't do the deal. Some slumlord buys the property. Sure, things are worse there. They still haven't replaced the units, and that mayor gets fucking arrested for this shit. He was bribing marijuana vendors, and he's in prison. And it was all I could do not to go visit him and just put my hand on the glass and ask him how he was doing. Guy completely fucked over a bunch of seniors because he doesn't understand how math or public policy works. He deserves to be.
Well, sounds like the Hindu principle. Like the Hindu principle of karma is true after all.
It is true. Yeah. Sorry for derailing the conversation there.
I wish Elliot, you just really told us how
it sounds like
it's
that story was great. It was kind of like, I shouldn't share much. I'm going to tell you the guy's name, the deal, exactly where it ends.
Yeah. I'm gonna bury because he's in prison for it. He's a felon. He was stealing from people. Yeah, he's a bad guy who got what he deserved, and he screwed over people in the process.
I'm picturing you as Christian Bale in American Hustle with the comb over, sliding the briefcase across the floor at the hotel room and meeting with the mayor. Fantastic.
It was really something. He was shaking down all kinds of people. And my dad gave me this advice when I was really young. He actually used the number $50,000, but he goes, Elliot, there's two types of crime. There's crimes you should not do, and there are crimes where the right tail outcome is you're on a private island with a beautiful woman for the rest of your life. He said, well, what are you going to do stealing $50,000? You maybe are okay for a year, but then you are probably in prison. He said, so just don't do that. You're not clever enough to figure out the small island crime, so just don't do crime. I was like, yeah, that's good.
So my dad had similar advice, Elliot, where he was like, Brett, have you ever thought about how if you go to a 7-Eleven and steal $100 from them and a pack of cigarettes, you go to jail for 30 years? But if you steal 50, and this was probably 30 years ago, he goes, if you steal $50 million from people on the internet, you basically get a slap on the wrist and you're told not to do it anymore. And there's no admission of guilt. He's like, so don't rob 7-Elevens and steal $100. Go big or go home.
That must be the guiding principle from all these multifamily syndicators. They're like, if I just rip off retail investors, no one's gonna come after me.
I'm not commenting on that, but I know you're feeling.
Of course you're not. Yeah. All right. So we've gotten way off track. Executive. I mean, I think we sort of talked through Executive Tower, right? There's a very specific buyer for this thing. I think you're right. It's going to be someone with some real local pull. No one from out of town is going to come in with the juice to get this done in a way that doesn't continue to eat their lunch.
What makes this not an opportunity in a way is that it's a good location, so that it would never find that price footing of land value less demo costs. Somebody buys this at probably what's a reasonable price. Won't be me.
Yeah, and I mean, just think about New Orleans as a whole too. I mean, it's one thing if you're doing this in Nashville or Atlanta or Dallas and certain places, which are growing markets from an employment perspective and population perspective. New Orleans isn't creating 20,000 jobs year over year. It's probably seeing negative net immigration, and that's just a recipe for most real estate deals not to survive. There's no example in history of any civilization that thrived during a declining populationary period. And that's all I'm going to wax poetic about history at this point, ancient civilizations.
It really is a shame because New Orleans is one of those special cities. It's a remarkable place, but you're right. Overall, it's seeing hardly any population growth, some years population decline. There's not big corporate relocations there. It's very much I think a tourism economy and some oil and gas. But it's a weird mismatch where the vibes of the city don't seem to bring with it a lot of the kind of economic prosperity that you would hope for a great American city. Eric, you got any closing thoughts here?
If you've got a stagnant or negative growth kind of town and you want to buy an office building on it and you don't have a tenant or tenants for it, that's a tough exercise, really tough exercise, and not one for me.
Yeah, I don't think I'm signing up for that abuse either. Brett, sounds like you're not.
I mean, I'd like to be able to have some inside, kind of access to Jazz Fest and the music scene there. Big Little Feat fan, like them a lot. Like a lot about New Orleans, but I don't think I'm playing ball on this one.
All right, I think that wraps it up, gents. This was a fun one. I'm glad we got to talk about this deal and a great city.
Absolutely.
Thank you.